We're here in County Roscommon in a fabulous location for Strokestown House, and I'm with John O'Driscoll, who's the General Manager here for the Irish Heritage Trust. Is that right, John?
Yes, that's right, Carina.
So, John, can you tell me a little bit about this house here and maybe the family that lived here?
Yes, of course. I suppose to begin with, we go right back to the middle of the 1600s. The Mahons were granted lands here in Strokestown, about 300 acres of land. That estate grew substantially, and by the time pre-famine, it was up to 30,000 acres through marriage and through connections.
So a really big estate here.
Really, really big estate. I suppose to highlight the most notable part of the history is the famine here. We are home to the Irish National Famine Museum, and that's almost ironic that here is the Irish National Famine Museum sitting in the shadow of the big house.
So you have this upstairs, downstairs type of scenario going on here.
Two very different stories sitting next to each other but totally linked.
Yes.
We come to the time of the famine, 1845. Major Dennis Mahon inherited Strokestown Park. He inherited a debt-ridden estate, the beginning of the Great Irish Famine, many rent strikes. What was he to do? Well, the first thing that happened was his daughter, Grace Catherine, married Henry Sanford Pakenham, relations of Lord Longford, the Duke of Wellington. That's when the lands went up to 30,000 acres.
Ah, so then you had the Pakenham-Mahon connection.
Mahon from then on, the name changed. Yeah. And then I think the next thing that Dennis did was not so great, really. We have the document in the Famine Museum, it's on show in the Famine Museum. An agent was brought in to advise, I suppose you could nearly call him a consultant, to advise on the running of the estate, John Ross Mahon.
He was really in debt at this stage.
He was, and he needed someone to come up with
an idea. Tenants were very poor, and there was no way of getting money.
No money coming in at all. The advice he was given was emigration on an extensive scale, clear your lands. Dennis took up this advice, and during the Great Irish Famine, mass eviction followed on this estate. At one point he chartered famine ships, and he gathered here in the town of Strokestown 1,490 of his tenants.
Almost 1,500 tenants were gathered from here.
Yeah.
Just this estate alone?
From this estate alone. He gathered them here and he walked them from Strokestown to Dublin along the Royal Canal. In Dublin, they were put onto ships and shipped to Liverpool, and from Liverpool to Quebec. And by the time they arrived at the quarantine station on the island of Groseille, just outside of Quebec, less than 700 people had survived the journey. More than half had died.
Oh.
Shortly after this, November of that year, 1847, Major Dennis Mahon was returning to his estate after a meeting in Roscommon town, and just on the outskirts of his estate, in the townland of Doherty, not too far from here, he was assassinated. The first landlord assassinated in Ireland during the famine, and we're standing outside his house now.
So I imagine there was a lot of ill will when people discovered that their families that had been emigrated forcibly, really, had died on the way to Canada.
Came back, you can imagine the shock, and we know that one of the ships got lost at sea. Word had come back that it had sank and that everybody had died on that ship. It did come in, it came in very, very late into Groseille, and there was a massive number of deaths on that ship. So truly tragic circumstances, people hearing this news, the people that they just sent off for a new life, or who had gone to start a new life, were now dead.
Dead, yes.
Never to be seen again. So Dennis was assassinated. His daughter was on her honeymoon on the Isle of Wight when this happened. She never set foot in Strokestown again.
Was that the end of the families living here at that point?
No, there was a little gap from about 1847 up until 1890. Grace Catherine's son, Henry Pakenham Mahon, came back to live here, and it was his daughter, Olive Pakenham Mahon, who sold the estate in 1979 to Jim Callery of the Westward Garage, a local businessman. Jim's garage was just outside of the estate wall. This is kind of the modern history, I suppose you'd call it. But it's a very important part of the story.
The story comes full circle back into the community again.
His garage premises were just outside of the estate wall. In 1979, Jim secured the dealership for Scania. All Scania trucks and coaches for Ireland come through Strokestown, a huge deal.
Yes.
He didn't have enough room around his garage. He approached Olive asking would she sell a couple of acres of land. Scania was coming, and Olive said no. The estate had gone from 30,000 acres and was now down to 300 acres directly around the house, and she did not want to see it get any smaller.
Okay.
Jim was notified after this that the family were putting the house and lands, the complete estate, up for auction in London. He flew to London and he ended up buying the lot.
Okay.
Jim, being a businessman, he's the first one, he will tell you it made no financial sense. He was going to take the land he needed, concentrate on his truck deal and possibly sell off the rest.
Let the rest,
bring
yeah.
the money back.
Yes, yes.
He made an arrangement that Olive could stay on in the house. One weekend she was going away to London and he said, do you mind if I go in and have a look through the place? She said, you own it. And on that weekend, going through this house, he came across a room stacked from floor to ceiling, boxes of documents, the estate archive. He couldn't but have a look, and when he did, he realised a lot of these documents dated to the period of the Great Irish Famine.
Oh,
immediately he knew
treasure
how
trove.
important this was. A huge collection.
So you here now have these documents on display in the Famine Museum part of the house here.
Yeah. Some of the documents are on show in the museum. Some of them are digitised on screens in the museum, and we have lots more. We're raising funds to hire an archivist here that will work totally on the archive that we have. It's safe. It's in temperature and humidity controlled rooms. Totally safe. We're minding it at the moment
to keep it.
Yeah. But there was a little miracle that day, going back to that day that Jim walked through the house.
Yes.
55,000 documents of varying sizes in the collection. The third piece of paper he picked up. We have it in the museum.
Yes.
We call it the Clonahee petition. The tenants of a small townland called Clonahee near Elphin were writing to the landlord asking for help for famine relief work. They say we cannot withstand the cries of our families from hunger.
Yes.
And then there was a threat in the letter, which was very unusual. We are not for turning against the laws of God or the land unless pressed to by hunger. And they wrote hunger in capital letters.
So really at a desperation.
At this stage. Jim Callery grew up in this townland. He still lives in that townland today.
That was his own townland?
It was his own townland, his own history he was holding in his hands. It changed everything. He said we have to preserve what we've got there, and the Famine Museum was created, the house was opened to the public, and Strokestown Park followed on as it is today.
Well, listen John, you have a big job in your hands here, but thank you so much for taking time to talk to us at Your Irish Heritage.
You're very welcome.
Thank you, John.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.